The example I'm going to use today is about all of the people who have been killed since 2013 through 2019 by police. This is a data set that you can find at the Mapping Police Violence site. All you have to do is go to that site and click on the link there, the Download Full Database, and you can have all the data that I'm going to present today. Here's what the data set looks like. It goes from 1 through 14, and I skip the rest, and it goes all the way down to 7664. That makes up 7,663 people who have been killed by police over the 7-year period from 2013 to 2019. You can see some of the data that they have provided in the database: the victim's name and age and gender and race, the date of the incident, the city where it occurred, how the person died via gunshot or taser or something else. Was the victim armed or unarmed? And they also provide links to newspaper articles where these individuals can be read about in more detail. They suggest at the site that they have captured about 92% of all the police killings that have occurred during that 7-year period from 2013 to 2019. Here are 4 individuals that you may have heard about in the news. 4 unarmed boys or men killed by police, and these 4 individuals will appear in the database. You got Michael Brown, killed in 2014 by police in Ferguson, Missouri, coming out of a convenience store. Got 12-year-old Tamir Rice, 2014 in Cleveland, had a play gun and was killed within 30 seconds of the time the police arrived at the site. You have victims of all races here. So 32-year-old Tony Timpa, and he was another one that said, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe," before he died. And 26-year-old Daniel Shaver. There were several individuals who have been victims of police killings lately or a while ago, and these individuals will not appear in the database. Along the top there, 26-year-old Breonna Taylor. She was the one killed while sleeping after police entered her place without knocking in Louisville, Kentucky. 27-year-old Rayshard Brooks, father of 4. He was the young man sleeping at the Wendy's drive-thru in Atlanta, Georgia. 46-year-old George Floyd from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was the one where the police officer had his knee on the neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Those 3 individuals will not be in the database because they were killed in 2020, and the data from the data set goes from 2013 to 2019. Toward the bottom there, Ahmaud Arbery, 25-year-old, killed near Glenn County, Georgia in February. He was the jogger. And 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, way back in February 2012 in Sanford, Florida, were killed not by police officers but by vigilantes. So they're not going to appear in the database because of they were not killed by police officers. Trayvon Martin also was killed in 2012. I do want to mention what this data set is not about. This data set is about civilians who are killed by police. It's not about police who are killed. And there are about 50 police officers each year who are killed in the line of duty. If you look at some more of these police stats in detail, about, on average, roughly 150 police officers die each year. 50 of them approximately are victims of violence in the line of duty. Say another 50 are killed accidentally via car crashes, motorcycle crashes, or being hit by a vehicle. The other 50 approximately will die by natural causes, heart attacks, drownings, and that kind of thing in the line of duty. All right, so I'd like to now get into some of the graphs, some of the summary graphs from the data set. The number of police killings each year is pretty consistent, or has been pretty consistent over the last 7 years from 2013 to 2019. On average, they're somewhere between 1,050 and 1,150. And if you take, say, 1,100 and divide by 365 days in the year, then you get approximately 3 police killings each day in the United States. If you look at the breakdown by race, the big tall blue bar to the left, that's the white race. You can see that overwhelmingly more whites are killed by police than any of the other racial groups. 44.1% of all the victims of police shootings, police killings, are white. Followed by blacks, 25 point, about a fourth, a little bit more than a fourth of the folks killed by police are black. Now, where the inequity comes in is the following. We know that about 64% of Americans are white, but only 44% are killed by police. So we would say that the whites are underrepresented in the group of those killed by police. On the other hand, blacks make up only about 13% of the U.S. population, but 25.4% of all the police killings are committed on blacks. And so blacks are killed by police about twice the rate as they appear in the general population. For Hispanics, that 17.4% is pretty consistent with the percentage of Hispanics in the general population. If you look at the trends over the 7-year period for each of the races, you'll see that more whites are killed each year, followed by blacks and then Hispanics. What's interesting here is that Hispanics make up a larger proportion of the population, yet the number of Hispanic deaths killed by police is lower than blacks. If you break it down by gender, males and females, the red bars are the males, and the races on the far left, and you break it down by race, you can see that overwhelmingly the red bars are much bigger than the blue bars, meaning that males are killed at a much higher rate than females. There are 7 transgender victims in the database that are not included in this graph. If we look at geographic location, what they did is they looked at the site where the murder was committed, and they looked at the zip code there, and then they classified using Zillow or some other source that they would classify it as either suburban or urban or rural. So the rural out in the country, 22%, slightly less than a fourth of those killed by police over the 7-year period occurred in a country rural setting. 27%, slightly more than a fourth of the police killings occurred in the city, in the urban areas, but overwhelmingly 50% of all of the police killings occurred in suburban areas. So as you can see, police killings is not only a city problem. Okay, so also in there they identify whether the victim was armed or unarmed. And the 4 choices they provide are allegedly armed or unarmed, or they were in a vehicle, maybe a pursuit with police, and they ended up being killed, or unclear. That is, they don't know whether the victim was armed or not. And you can see that overwhelmingly about 71% of all of those killed by police were allegedly armed. They had some kind of weapon, a gun or a knife or something else. And 14%, however, 1,073 of those police killings were on unarmed people. And that works out to about 153 unarmed individuals each year. If you break down just the 3 main groups, white, black, and Hispanic, race, ethnicity, you can see the white bar is much higher because there are many more deaths that occur on whites. But if you look at the percentages, whites are armed at a higher rate than both blacks and Hispanics, 73% for whites, and then 67 and 68% for black and Hispanic, respectively. Blacks are unarmed at a higher rate than whites, 17% to 13%. Now, if you look at of those that did have a weapon, what was their weapon of choice, then here's how it breaks down, again by race. Overall, about 3/4 have a gun. And these are just the folks that have weapons. What kind of weapon is it? And then about the other fourth of the time, the weapon of choice is something other than a gun. And these other weapons, there's quite a variation of weapons. There are axes and bats and knives and tasers and many other different types of weapons. Okay, so if you look at the race of the unarmed victims, then you can again see that 42.1% are white, 31.3% are black, and 18.7% are Hispanic. And then the heights of the bars represent the actual number of individuals who were killed by police. And what you can take from this is that, on average, there are about 65 unarmed whites, 48 unarmed blacks, and 29 unarmed Hispanics that are killed by police in the United States each year. Okay, so are all states the same in terms of police killings? So next comes some comparisons by U.S. state. When you look at the states with the highest number of people killed, they correspond with the states with the highest populations. But again, we break it down by race, and you can see several of the states that have big populations. And then the heights of the bars represent the number of individuals killed by police. The red bar, you can see, overtakes the blue bar in every situation. More blacks are killed by police than whites in every one of these states with high populations. And more blacks are killed than Hispanics in all of these states, except California, and California has a very high Hispanic population. Now, when you look at the states with the fewer number of people killed by police, some of our more rural states, a trend is different. Over the 7-year period, the states with the fewest number of people killed by police average less than 4 deaths per year. And you'll also see that the blue bars are much higher than the red bars or the Hispanic bars in all of these, usually in most of the cases. Several states, like Wyoming and Vermont and North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, New Hampshire, all of those states have 0 police killings of black people. Okay, now we're going to do a comparison by city of all of these police killings. This was a graphic that I took off the Mapping Police Violence site, and they grouped the city police departments over that 7-year period by the size of the population. So you've got the smaller cities on the right that have a population of 250 to 500,000. And then in the lower left, you have the cities that have a population between 500,000 and 1 million. And then in the upper left, you have the cities that have more than 1 million people in their population. And the numbers that are attached to these are the number of police killings per 1 million in the population. It's we use this statistics or this rate so that we can compare apples to oranges, different cities to different cities. So when you compare a couple of cities with these similar sized populations, you'll notice that they are quite different. In fact, in Phoenix, police kill at a rate 8.5 times higher than New York. For the smaller sized cities, the police in St. Louis kill at a rate that's 6 times that of Minneapolis. And for the mid-size cities, the police in Oklahoma City kill at a rate 4.5 times that of Detroit. Not all the police departments in all the cities kill at the same rate. So the numbers on this graph, again, are the average annual killing rates per 1 million in the population. Down at the bottom, you see some of the biggest U.S. cities, New York, Atlanta, Philadelphia, and so on. And just to give you a sense of how to interpret some of these, in Anaheim, California, blacks are about 11.3 times more likely than whites to be killed by police. You can see for Anaheim, the white bar is 4.6 per million, and the black bar is 52.2 black citizens per million. And so if you take 52.2 and divide by 4.6, that's where you get the 11.3. Then in Chicago, very few, as a rate, whites are killed by police, and many more blacks are killed by police. So blacks are over 30 times more likely than whites to be killed by police in Chicago. And here's a little table that kind of gives you the relationships. It's the same graph from the previous slide, but in New York, blacks are about 7.8 times more likely to be killed than whites by police. And you can see in Chicago, Hispanics are about 7.1 times more likely to be killed than whites by police. And then overall, nationwide, blacks are about 2.5 times more likely to be killed than whites by the police. This next slide deals with those cities that have high Hispanic populations. Again, the rates are the number of individuals killed per million in the population, comparing whites and blacks and Hispanics. You can see in these cities with the largest Hispanic populations that they're mostly from the Southwest and California. In these cities that have lots of Hispanic residents, blacks are killed at a much higher rate than either whites or Hispanics. Here's another summary table. In Los Angeles, whites and Hispanic populations are similar in size, yet Hispanics are more than two times likely than whites to be killed by police. There are two cities in this graph where you'll notice the rate at which whites are killed by police is actually higher than Hispanics, and that would be Dallas and Las Vegas. Here's another graphic from the Mapping Police Violence site, and this one deals with, this pictograph here deals with kind of the justice part of it. In all of these police killings, you know, how many times are police brought up on charges? And if they're brought up on charges, then are they convicted? And if they're convicted, how long do they serve their sentences? So all of this is part of the justice side of things. So let's break this down a little bit more. So were charges filed? First of all, when there's a death that occurs, is the police officer who committed the killing, are they charged with a crime? Or is it treated as justified in some way? So if you break it down, it doesn't matter how you break it down by race, about 99% of the time, police who kill U.S. citizens, 99% of the time, no charges are brought. Only in 101 times in the entire 7,663 police killings were charges brought against the police officer. All right, so let's take a look at those 101, that very small number that were actually charged with a crime. And the question is, what happened after charges were brought? Well, after charges were brought, you can have, in the database, there are 3 things that they identified. One thing is they could, the officer who was charged could be convicted and sentenced. Another outcome is that the officer would be acquitted. And the third outcome would be, well, there's no outcome yet. The outcome is pending. The court case is still going on. So if you add up all of those bar heights, you get something close to 101. If you don't, you have something a little bit less than 101 because not all the races are included. But 27% of the time, the officer is convicted and sentenced. In 22% of the time, the officer is acquitted. And over half, 51% of the time, the outcome is still pending. So there's been kind of no formal outcome, justice outcome here. All right, so let's take a look at those who are convicted and sentenced. What kind of a sentence do they get? So after the police officers are convicted and sentenced, here you'll see some of the sentences that have been received over the last 7 years. It's interesting to note that all police officer sentences were the result of the killing of an unarmed victim. No police officers were sentenced if the victim had a weapon of any sort. As you go from left to right along this graph, 8 individuals received sentences from 3 months to 6 years. You can see how they're broken down by race there. 10 police officers received sentences of more than 16 years. 3 police officers received probation. 6 trials of police officers ended in mistrial, and then after one of them pled to a civil rights violation. And then some are still awaiting sentences. So over a 7-year period, there were 7,663 police killings. Of those, 1,073 were unarmed victims. This led to 101 police officers being charged. And of those, 18 were sentenced to prison terms. 3 were sentenced to probation. There were 6 mistrials, and 4 are still awaiting sentencing. Okay, that's just a sum of what you can get from that database. But in summary, here's what it tells us. About 3 citizens per day are killed by police. About 95% of the victims are male. Whites are killed by police more often than any other racial group in the U.S., but blacks are over 2.5 times more likely than whites to be killed by police in the U.S. In some cities, blacks are as high as 24 times more likely to be killed than whites. And about 71% of the time, the victims of police killings are armed, and 14% are unarmed. That works out to about 153 police murders per year of unarmed individuals. And whites are more likely than blacks or Hispanics to be armed. Several states average less than 4 people killed by police per year. And the police killings in big cities vary widely, but uniformly blacks victims are killed at a higher rate than white victims. Okay, well, thanks for watching, and please subscribe to this channel. I'll try to put together more summaries that I've used in my classes over the years that highlight some of the racial inequities that occur in our society. And those include incarcerations, death penalty, traffic stops, poverty, income, home ownership, degree completion, and higher education. So I think it's important for my students and others to just have a general awareness of this data. And the next step, of course, is to do something about it.